What's going on, everybody? I'm your host, Ben Ballion, back with another episode of the Sports Pod. And today, we're going to get into the Mets and if they can realistically make the playoffs. So I'll get into all of it on the other side of the intro. Hit it.
That ball is out of here! Out of here!
All right, before I get into this episode, make sure you go follow me on all my socials. All of them will be linked in the description, as always. But the TikTok is at the.sports.pod. The Instagram's at the sportspod_Ben. And make sure you like and watch my shorts over here on YouTube. I post everything on YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, TikTok. And I've been doing a lot of it recently. And I've been enjoying it. So make sure you go check that out. I'll continue to make content there, and I'll continue to make content right here in full form videos. All right, let's get into this episode on whether I think the Mets can actually make the playoffs. So earlier this year, if you would have asked me this question, I would have said absolutely not. This team isn't good. They might be playing. If you're asking me this at the end of April, they're playing a little bit better than they actually are right now, but they're not good enough to make the playoffs. And then if you ask me at any point in May, I would say no. And it'd be no, period, stop. They're not good enough. The bullpen was terrible. The offense wasn't hitting, and it just wasn't really a good team. But then in June, something happened. Whether it was Grimace, whether it was the players meeting, whether it was Jorge Lopez, and then the whole season just completely turned around. And then from June on, if you ask me, I would say, yeah, there's definitely a chance. This team has shown that they can hit on offense. The lineup is very potent and they can strike at any moment. And then on the pitching side, the bullpen is much improved and the starters showing what they can do. Especially Sean Manaea and Luis Severino, who I'll get to in just a minute here. But as of right now, on what's today? August 23rd, a Friday, one of the last Fridays of the summer. If the Mets can make the playoffs, I would tell you absolutely. But it's going to take help from other teams. This weekend and next week, you have a chance to help yourselves out by beating the Padres and the Diamondbacks. But other weekends when you're playing the White Sox and the A's, those are teams you have to beat easily. And the schedule, I don't know if it gets any easier, but if it does, you can't take the competition lightly. I mean, you got the White Sox to end this month, which you absolutely need those games. And you got the Red Sox, who aren't a terrible team. The Reds and Blue Jays are similar. And then you play the Phillies 7 times in the month of September. I've said that this 10-game stretch is going to be the season, but I think that other 7 games against the Phillies are going to have a lot to do with it. And honestly, what might be the most important part of the schedule, that second to last series versus the Atlanta Braves. I know I keep harping on it. I think I mentioned it in the last episode, but the Braves are a good team. The Braves are getting back to what they do. And if the Mets could beat the Braves, it'll be very symbolic. It'll be very full circle. And it'll show how far this team has come from April and May when they weren't good. They just were flat out bad. All right, now let's get into some of the pitching stuff I wanted to talk about. Starting it off with the starters and mainly Luis Severino. After last night's start, he allowed 1 run in 5 innings of work, which puts him at 1 run in his last 14 innings of work, going back to his complete game shutout last Saturday against the Marlins, rather. And he really has, like I was saying in the last episode, he has ace potential. We get that, right? But after this season, he has a real opportunity to become the ace of the Mets if Sean Manaea decides to opt out of his player option and go elsewhere. Sevy's on a 1-year deal, but I think he wants to stay in New York. You saw last year the Yankees didn't want him, so he came right over to the Mets. Now I think he's found a home with the Mets, and David Stearns will be willing to pay him a little bit more money than maybe some other teams, because I do believe that he can be an ace if he doesn't get injured. And he's proved that he can pitch almost the whole season without getting injured, knock on wood. But if he continues to do what he's doing right now, he doesn't get injured, he has the stuff, he has the talent, he knows how to pitch, he's smart, he doesn't really get rocked. Like, there's not really a start besides that one against the Twins where he just didn't have it, and that's gonna happen over what each pitcher gets like 27 to 30 starts. It's bound to happen at one point. But if you minimize those days and you pitch to keep your team in the games, he should have no problem being an ace or second best pitcher on a team. And now getting into some stuff about Sean Manaea, who I think is another really interesting one. Because he's on a $13 million, he's making $13 million this year. He has the chance to opt out. And over his last month or so, he's been pitching like an ace. But if he opts out, he's going to want a lot of money. And it's similar, not to compare the Knicks to the Mets, really, but it's similar to the Isaiah Hartenstein situation, where IR was a bench piece. He didn't play as much as Mitch, but then Mitch went down, the equivalent to Kodai Senga going down, the main starter, and Manaea got a chance to showcase his talents. Same with Hartenstein. And then with the chance to go to free agency, he took more money to go elsewhere. So I think that could be a similar situation. But I do think David Stearns and Steve Cohen should flex their financial powers and re-up on Sean Manaea if he decides to opt out. I know Blake Snell's going to be available. And if you could retain all three of those guys, if you could get Blake Snell and then re-sign Sevy and hopefully Manaea opts into his contract, that would be the ideal scenario. The Mets probably wouldn't have a ton of money to go after Soto. They wouldn't have enough money to go after Soto. And it just wouldn't work out if you got Blake Snell. I think he's going to be the hardest one to get. I think the Mets could have signed him in the offseason or traded for him at the deadline, but that's okay. I don't think it would have been worth it because you would have had to give up a top prospect. And I read today that the Mets still believe that things can work out with Brett Baty. And I have something to say coming up on that in a minute or two here. Going to the bullpen now because Daniel Nunez just got back. And speaking of the trade deadline, arguably the Mets' biggest trade deadline acquisition at the time, Huascar Brazoban just got designated to AAA or option to AAA to take Nunez to clear up roster space. I mean, Brazoban, I was live on a stream when that happened. Follow me on Twitch, by the way. That's linked in the description below. I don't do a ton of streams, but when I do, they're a lot of fun. So maybe I'll start doing them more once the Knicks get going, once the Giants get going. What I was saying is Brazoban, when he came over here and got traded from the Marlins, I thought he was going to be a really good piece. He was really solid. He had good numbers. I think he had a 3 or sub-E ERA. A sub-3 ERA. And he had really good numbers. His stuff looked good from what I watched of him. And I thought he was going to be a big piece to this bullpen down the stretch. It just didn't work out that way. In a Met uniform, he went 0-1 with a 6.3 ERA in 9 appearances. And he just didn't have it. And David Stearns realized that, and he realized that he's the best option to send to AAA. I mean, you're not really going to send someone else like Phil Maton down there who's been solid in his couple appearances as a Met. He doesn't pitch too much, but when he does, he usually gets outs. And that's all you need. I also think getting to Nunez now, his return is going to be huge because of Reed Garrett's recent struggles. I think Garrett, he was awesome the first month or two of the season, and then he just didn't have it. And then he went on the IL, and he hasn't really had it since. So it's all right. He's still in the Mets bullpen. We hopefully Mendoza and Jeremy Hefner figure out a way to fix him and get him back pitching and on a roll the way he was earlier in the season for an October playoff push. And I think that's gonna be the biggest thing. The back end of the bullpen. Nunez, Buto, and Diaz. Lockdown. You got 6 innings out of your starter, whoever it is. Game one. Hear me out. Game one of a wild card series. Manaea on the bump. 6 strong innings, maybe gives up a run or two. Then you go to Nunez in the go to Buto in the 7th, Nunez in the 8th, Diaz in the 9th. That is locked down. That is locked in. That is an awesome trio and an awesome group of guys to go to in a big time game. Manaea, obviously, he's been able to showcase what he can do, but Nunez has been awesome. And the one worry I have is that he's not going to be able to. He's not going to be able to recapture the feeling he had before he went down with that injury. Like, he's not going to have the same juice or the same mojo, and he's not going to be as effective, which that would not be ideal at all. But you still have other guys in the bullpen. And Buto has been awesome. He has a 1 point something ERA, I think like 1.23 going into that Sunday game against not Sunday. I was doing this in the last episode too. I was thinking it was a weekend series. I think it was a Wednesday game against the Orioles. Jesse Winker's walk-off. But you saw Buto. I think his ERA raised a little bit in that game because of all those walks he gave up, which he hadn't been doing. He's a good lefty out of the pen. He hasn't been walking too many people, and he'll be good. I think that might be a little bump in the road. And it wasn't even really a bump in the road because the Mets won the game. I get he didn't have his greatest stuff or his greatest command, but he had a solid outing and the Mets won the game, which is all you can ask for. All right, let's transition into the offense. I got a couple things to say here. I'll start with that Brett Baty stuff. So the NY Post reported that the Mets still think that Brett Baty can pan out, and that's why they didn't move him at the deadline. My thought on it is you have Mark Vientos as your third baseman of the future, right? And I want the Mets to lock him up this offseason for years to come. And then if the Mets lose either Pete Alonso or JD Martinez, those are the holes that Mark Vientos is going to fill. Obviously, he's not a great defender, and he's pretty bad, I'm not going to lie, at defense. And if you can plug Brett Baty in there, who when he was up earlier this year, he was really solid at third base. I know the problem with him is going to be the hitting. If he can figure out even just a little bit, that defense will give him some insurance, and it'll make sure that the Mets keep him up in the bigs. Because if you lose Alonso or Martinez, or worst case scenario, you lose both. And I got my top 5 Mets I want the Mets to sign next year. I got that coming up at the end of the episode also. But if you lose Martinez or Pete Alonso, Vientos is going to have to fill one of those holes. I think the best spot for him is DH. Out of the 2 spot, I think that would be the best move. But I really do want the Mets to bring back JD, even though he's 36 years old. Give him 2 or 3 years, because it's just a different lineup when he's in it. And I'll talk about him more in a little bit, because he's breaking out along with a bunch of other Mets. And then if you lose Alonso, Vientos has shown that he can play first. I think his defense would have to improve, and he'd have to really lock in on it for the winter. and that'd be the main thing he'd have to do. But it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for him. And Brett Beatty's a way better defender than Vientos is. So that would be my thought on it. But again, he can't hit major league hitting. The Mets have given him 2 chances, 2 real stints with the team to do it, and he's proved that he can't. So I don't really know. Unless something drastic changes, I don't think Brett Beatty is going to be able to succeed on the major league level. So Jesse Winker hit that homer on Sunday. I'm starting to think that he's going to hit for some more power. I mean, he hasn't done anything since that homer. I don't think he played last night. But just getting him on the right track, getting him his first homer, and putting the belief in his mind, like giving him his Mets moment. Jesse Winker went 2 for 5 last night, and he scored 2 runs. So let's see here. And he had a double. So he's starting to break out and he's starting to hit for more power, which I think is the best scenario possible. Because the Mets traded for him for his power, and that's what we've needed out of him. Another person I think coming back is going to be huge is Starling Marte. Before he got injured this year, he was one of the Mets' best hitters when Lindor wasn't going well and Alonso, who still isn't really going great, was going well, and Brandon Nimmo wasn't going well. Marte was kind of a light in the darkness, and he was hitting. He wasn't hitting for as much power as I would expect, but he was getting on base, and that's what he does. Even out of like the 6 or 7 spot, I think I really like him. My ideal lineup right now: Lindor leading off, Vientos in the 2, Nimmo 3rd, Alonso 4th. I don't like McNeil 5th because I think he's better out of a 6 or 7. Depending on the day, either Jesse Winker or JD Martinez 5th, who's ever DHing. And then Alvarez 7, McNeil 8, and Harrison Bader 9 playing center field. So that would be my ideal lineup, and Marte plays a big part in it because he can switch with Tyrone Taylor if he needs a day off, who's been really good for the Mets. And that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if the Mets gave him some days off, because he is losing a step, and he just needs some rest. His body needs more time to recover. He's getting up there in age. His contract ends next year. I don't think the Mets will bring him back after that. I think his career is pretty much going to be over. He might stretch it out with another team on like a 1-year deal, just trying to play for as long as possible. But I think he's pretty much done. All right, let's get to the top 5 Mets I want to be back next year. So these are all Mets that are on 1-year contracts, and I didn't include Sean Manaea or anybody who has any sort of options in their deal. Just guys that are going to be gone no matter what next year. They're going to be free agents. Starting at number 5, Daniel Nunez. The reason I don't have him higher on this list is because he's a reliever, and bullpen arms can come or go. But he's been super solid, and it's going to be a lot, and he's going to have to show me a lot this last part of the season, coming back healthy, for me to want the Mets to bring him back. Because unless he's like a super good top of the bullpen guy who can pitch in high leverage spots late in games, which he was doing earlier this year, then he can stay at 5. But if he shows me that, he'll definitely move up the list and maybe even be a closer if Edwin Diaz goes down, or he's still here once Diaz's contract is up. All right, number 4, Pete Alonso. Now, I'm a Pete fan. He's homegrown. I like him just like everybody else. But the fact of the matter is, he hasn't done anything on offense this year. Yeah, he's hit, 26, 27 homers. He'll be around 40 at the end of the season. But I can't even count how many times he's been up in a clutch spot and he hasn't delivered. Like, even just a sack fly, he'll strike out. And it's so easy for pitchers to strike him out because he'll swing at a pitch 5 miles out of the zone, at a slider, going a slider outside the other batter's box. It's ridiculous. He needs to adjust to that pitch, and I don't know how nobody's told him that. And if somebody has and he's not listening, that's on him. He can't swing at that pitch. But I wouldn't mind bringing him back on like a 1 or 2 year deal. Not a ton of money. Just get him back and basically make him prove it before he gets his big deal. I remember Scott Boras, his agent, is trying to rebound off his catastrophe last year with Blake Snell and Shohei. Not Shohei. Who's the other guy? Matt Chapman, I think. I don't know. His clients weren't getting big deals and the deals that they wanted. So he's trying to rebound, and maybe he'll take a shorter deal with a little bit less money just so Alonso can sign earlier. All right, number 3, Harrison Bader. Now, Bader, more of a defensive outfielder, and he plays a really good center field, a really solid center field. But he also lengthens the lineup. Out of that 9 spot, he flips the lineup a lot of the time. And he's got speed. He beats out a lot of infield hits, I feel like. And overall, I would just like him back. He's a really good role player to have on the team. And it would be good if the Mets could figure out a way to bring him back. I don't know. I feel like a team might pay him too much money. No. All right, number 2, JD Martinez. Now, JD at the start of the season, he didn't play. He signed really late. I think he was another Scott Boras guy. But he didn't start playing till mid to late April. He had the back issue. And then once he got in the lineup, the whole field changed. I get that he's 36, but he just has to hit. He never has to play the field. I don't think he has one time this year. And he can do it. I think he's a good leader in the clubhouse. I think he's a good leader for Mark Vientos. You always see them on Instagram, like around each other on flights and stuff like that, where I would like Martinez to teach Vientos a couple things, because Martinez has had a really good career just hitting, and Vientos is trying to have a similar career, starting out in the field, and then he'll probably end up being a DH for the majority of his career. But JD Martinez is at number 2, and the number 1 Met I want David Stearns to bring back next year, Luis Severino. He proved that he can pitch like an ace this year. After last year, he was tipping his pitchers. He was getting injured a bunch, and he had a super high ERA, and he just wasn't pitching well. This year, he proved that he proved again that he could be a 1 or a 2, and he can pitch almost a whole season without getting hurt, knock on wood. So if Manaea opts out and he signs elsewhere, I think the Mets absolutely have to bring Severino back, because Kodai Senga and I don't even know who, and maybe like David Peterson are not a good 1-2 punch. I don't want Quintana back, and Severino's the guy I want back. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Sports Pod. Make sure you like, follow, comment, and subscribe. And make sure you keep it locked with the Sports Pod.